up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon. President Baek Geun-hye's Conservative Party scores a landslide victory in Korea's largest ever by-elections, winning a mandate to focus on economic revitalization and the president's reform drive. After the humiliating defeat in Wednesday's by-elections, opposition leaders stepped down for failing to turn the main opposition party into a credible alternative to the ruling camp. Plus, Argentina faces a second default in just 13 years after failing to come to an agreement with its creditors. And these stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Thursday, July 31st here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We begin with the results from the largest by-election in Korea's history, where 15 seats for the National Assembly were up for grabs.
It was an overwhelming victory for the ruling party, winning 11 seats and regaining its majority in the National Assembly. Choi You-sun wraps up the results for us.
It's a victory for the ruling Saenuri Party. With a voter turnout of expected 32.9%, the ruling party took home 11 out of the 15 parliamentary seats up for grabs in Wednesday's by-elections. That allows the party to regain majority at the National Assembly. Despite the main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy's unity with the Minor Justice Party in 3 constituencies in the capital region, only one candidate has defeated his ruling party rival. In the hotly contested race of Seoul's Dongjak-B district, the ruling party's former Seoul mayor candidate Na Kyung-won secured a ticket to parliament after defeating her unified opposition rival Roh Hoe-chan, albeit by a margin of a bit over 1 percentage point. In the Suwon-si district of Gyeonggi-do province, opposition candidate and political big name Son Ha-kyu bowed out to conservative rookie Kim Yong-nam, who garnered nearly 53% of votes. In the Suwon-D district, the opposition's Park Kwang-won, a former journalist, came out the winner against his ruling party rival and chief of staff to former President Lee Myung-bak, Im Tae-hee, with a difference of over 5,000 votes. The ruling party swept the other 3 capital area districts, including Gimpo, where the ruling party's Hong Cheol-ho tasted victory against liberal political veteran Kim Do-kwan. Securing all of the 2 seats in its traditional stronghold of southeastern Gyeongsang region, the ruling party also took all 3 seats from the central Chungcheong area. As for the opposition, it won 3 seats from its political base of southwestern Jeolla region. But the 4th seat in the Suncheon-Goksang district was claimed by President Park's close aide Lee Jung-hyun, the first time ever by a ruling party candidate. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
And following a crushing defeat in Wednesday's by-elections, the co-leaders of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy have resigned. All members of the party's Supreme Council, including co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Cheol-soo, decided to step down to take responsibility for the by-election loss, the party spokesman said after a Supreme Council meeting. The leaders have been heavily criticized for causing friction during the nomination process and thereby lowering the party's chances of a good showing in the poll. Party floor leader Park Young-sun will temporarily take the helm until new leaders are elected. So voters have given the Conservatives the opportunity to overhaul their party and focus on more urgent issues rather than being wrangled in political disputes. The party's leadership's top priorities now, boosting the economy and getting the president's reform drive going. Ji Myung-gil reports.
President Park Geun-hye has been given the green light to get busy running state affairs for the rest of her term. The ruling Saenuri Party's unexpected landslide victory in Wednesday's by-election has given the government a mandate to rebuild itself in the wake of April's ferry disaster and pursue its stated goal of economic revival. The governing party will continue to support President Park in carrying out her national reform drives. The ruling party's new chairman, Kim Moo-sung, is expected to further boost his authority within the party.
The Saenuri Party will reform itself in a humble manner to become a new Saenuri Party, to win back credibility in the eyes of the people.
The victory is being seen as an indication of public fatigue, with the opposition's constant push to highlight the government's shortcomings, and it gives the Saenuri Party a chance to give itself a complete overhaul. The crushing defeat means it's back to the drawing board for the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy.
We believe the public reprimanded us for neglecting our duties to take responsibility and undergo reforms.
Despite what many people saw as favorable conditions, the opposition bloc failed to garner any significant voter support. The opposition party had asked voters to pass judgment on the ruling Saenuri Party and the incumbent government for its poor handling of April's ferry disaster and the ensuing investigations. The ruling Saenuri Party now has 158 seats in the 300-seat National Assembly. The main opposition party has 130 seats. Kim Young-gyun, Arirang News.
Government measures to revitalize the housing market go into effect on Friday. They're intended to lessen the burden on potential home buyers and make it easier for them to stay out of debt. But as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, it could end up having the opposite effect for the older generation.
Some government regulations on the housing market are being eased starting Friday, and the Korean economy is expected to start feeling the effects in the latter half of this year. The changes include easing measures that limit the amount that people can borrow from banks when buying a house, depending on various economic variables, including income. The loan-to-value and debt-to-income, or LTV and DTI ratios, are being raised to 70% and 60% respectively. This means home buyers would be able to borrow up to $340,000, up nearly $100,000 from the current total when buying a house worth $488,000. They'll also feel less pressure to turn to non-banking institutions that charge them higher interest rates. The policy has already started to bring some vitality into the housing market. The number of housing transactions in Seoul shot up in July, which is traditionally an off month for home buying. The Financial Supervisory Service says the amount of housing mortgage loans increased by 80% in June from the previous month to $475 million, the highest amount in 12 months. But the moves are also being met with concern. It's feared the deregulatory moves may lead people in their 50s or older into more debt. Last month, the amount of housing mortgage loans for people in those older age groups increased an average of 20% from 2 years earlier. This according to data from Korea's 4 major commercial banks. They were apparently trying to pay back debt accrued from self-employed businesses and from losses incurred after failing to sell houses amid falling prices. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's Samsung Electronics has posted some very disappointing second quarter figures on the back of weakening smartphone sales. The company says operating profit in the April to June period was down 24.5% from a year earlier at just under 7.2 trillion won. That's a touch over $7 billion. Samsung's second quarter sales also slumped nearly 9% from the same period last year. Analysts say Samsung, the world's largest smartphone maker, is facing a slowdown in its mobile business, and its margins are being hampered by the strong Korean won.
Korea's biggest web search engine, basically Korea's version of Google, has had a banner second quarter. Not only did Naver record significant rises in its operating profits, its main competitors slipped up. As our Hwang Jae reports, that's very good news for Naver and its global aspirations.
It seems Naver, Korea's #1 portal operator, has solidified a corner on its market. The company's second quarter profit rose 39% from a year earlier to 191.2 billion won, or roughly $186 million. The rise runs counter to the 30% drop in operating profit recorded by local competitor Daum Communications in the second quarter, and operating losses from the nation's third largest web web portal player SK Communications. With a firm hold on the domestic market, Naver is now looking overseas with its messenger application service Line. Overseas sales driven by Line took up more than 30% of Naver's overall sales for the first time in the April to June period this year. Around 80% of Line's revenue is generated from Japan. Thailand and Indonesia are also big markets in terms of user numbers, while Line has also made inroads in Mexico and the United States. Sales from Line in the second quarter rose 56% from the previous year to $178 million. Naver also said earlier this month that Line had applied for an initial public offering in Tokyo. With the second quarter performance numbers exceeding market expectations, analysts say it's now more likely that Line's IPO in the Japanese market goes smoothly. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, Latin America's third largest economy is headed down the path towards default for the second time in 13 years. This after talks between Argentina and its holdout creditors ended without a deal. Na Kyung-won has the details.
His face lined with tension. Argentine Economy Minister Axel Kicillof walks into a press conference in New York after failing to reach agreement on averting his country's second default in nearly 13 years.
This offer is legal for Argentina and doesn't violate our contract's clauses, but was not accepted by the vulture funds. This offer wasn't accepted because evidently they want more, and they want it now.
Global ratings agency Standard & Poor's has downgraded Argentina's foreign currency rating to selective default. Analysts say a default of Latin America's third largest economy is unlikely to have a huge impact on the global economy, but will likely weaken the Argentina peso as more people hold on to dollars. The imminent default stems from a years-long legal battle with two of Argentina's bondholders who had rejected restructured debt agreements in 2002 when the country first defaulted. The Buenos Aires government at present cannot pay other creditors because of a U.S. court ruling last month, which said no creditor can be paid unless the two so-called holdout creditors are paid as well. Kicillof says the country will take all the necessary measures to confront what he referred to as an unfair situation. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to continue winding down its bond-buying stimulus plan, cutting its monthly asset purchases to $25 billion from $35 billion. This is its sixth consecutive $10 billion cut, and it means the Fed is on course to end its purchase program in October. Fed officials, led by Chair Janet Yellen, are also stepping up a debate over when to raise the country's interest rates for the first time since 2006, as unemployment is falling faster and inflation is picking up to its 2% target. For now, though, interest rates were kept near the 0% range, this despite the jobless rate falling to a 6-year low of 6.1%. North Korea has, on 16 different occasions this year alone, conducted missile and projectile tests, and this, of course, has drawn international condemnation each and every time. Now, with the provocations becoming ever more frequent, the US says it's ready to tighten the screw on the regime, but it's asking the rest of the world to help them and follow suit. Julian reports.
Washington's point man on North Korea, Glenn Davis, says the United States won't sit back and simply wait on Pyongyang to denuclearize.
We're going to continue to do everything we can, not to sit down and have a coffee klatch with them and try to convince them of the logic of it, but to use pressure, in particular, to point out to them that there's only one way forward. It's the peaceful diplomatic path forward.
The comments came in a hearing held by the House Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific, where Davies and the U.S. Special Envoy for North Korean Human Rights, Robert King, were questioned for over an hour on the Obama administration's approach to Pyongyang's combative policies. King defended the administration's stance.
We're looking at sanctions. One of the issues that we need to do is try to do whatever we do in concert with other countries. Sanctions by the United States alone are very limited effectiveness.
In the latest round of unilateral measures against the North Korean regime, the United States Treasury Department imposed sanctions on 2 North Korean shipping companies that operated a ship that was seized by Panama last year for trying to transport military equipment in violation of UN resolutions. The renewed emphasis on U.S. policy towards Pyongyang comes on the heels of a series of missile launches by the reclusive state, 16 this year alone. North Korea fired 4 more short-range missiles into the East Sea on Wednesday afternoon. In response, the U.S. Department of Defense said North Korea should stop polluting waters around the country with missiles and focus instead on feeding its own people. 유리안, 아리랑 뉴스.
And time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this Thursday lunchtime. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
Eunice, there is global outrage over the latest shelling by Israel of another UN school in Gaza, and it's said to be the biggest refugee camp in the region.
That's right, Mark. That UN school was sheltering some 3,300 Palestinians, and after Wednesday's assault that struck before daybreak, authorities say at least 17 people were killed and 90 others were wounded. It was the 6th UN school to be hit in this conflict, the second with deadly consequences. Devastated, the chief of the UN's main relief agency in Gaza called on the world to take deliberate international political action to end the continuing carnage. At least 16 Palestinians were also killed and more than 200 wounded in an Israeli strike that hit a crowded shopping area in the Shijaya district of Gaza City. Both attacks came during a 4-hour truce called by the Israeli military, which was rejected by Hamas as meaningless. Wednesday's events now put the death toll of Palestinians above 1,300 and Israel's at 58. Most of the Palestinian deaths have been of civilians, and many of those have been women and children. Over in India, a massive landslide triggered by heavy rains is feared to have trapped up to 200 people in a remote village in Maharashtra state. At least 17 bodies have been recovered from the rubble after part of a mountain gave way on Wednesday, spilling down a mix of trees, rocks, mud, and debris. With 70 homes still buried underneath, the death toll is expected to rise. 9 disaster response teams made up of nearly 400 personnel have been mobilized, but persisting rains and bad roads into the rural village is making rescue efforts challenging, as is the poor communication infrastructure. The region around the village had been greatly deforested, making the area more vulnerable to landslides. And even more sanctions are in store for Russia, warned G7 member states, who called on Moscow to back off from supporting and supplying weapons to separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. The world leaders also called for a ceasefire at the crash site of downed Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 in Ukraine, still inaccessible to international experts due to the ongoing heavy fighting. The threat of fresh sanctions come just over a day after the U.S. outlined its sanctions against Moscow, spanning the energy, arms, and finance sectors. The EU also previewed its most ambitious economic offensive yet. It added 8 names to its sanctions list, among them several members of the inner circle of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Moscow has called the U.S. and EU sanctions destructive and short-sighted. And finally, the French government has temporarily closed its embassy and evacuated its ambassador to Libya from the conflict-ridden country. The foreign ministry said 39 other French nationals and 7 Britons were also on that warship that transported the ambassador to Toulon. This as rival militias and government forces continue to be riled in fighting both in the capital of Tripoli and Benghazi. The Korean government has also imposed a travel ban on Libya, the first in 3 years, effective beginning on Monday for 6 months.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Korea's largest automaker, Hyundai Motor, is recalling more than 880,000 Sonata sedans sold in the U.S. over problems with gear shift levers. According to U.S. safety regulators, an issue with the model's transmission shift cable can make it seem as though the car is in one gear, such as park or drive, when it's actually in another, raising the risk of a crash. The recall affects Sonata models produced at a manufacturing plant in Alabama between 2011 and 2014. Hyundai said there have been over 1,100 warranty claims about the problem and 7 incidents related to the issue. Now, there are concerns the recall of Hyundai's best-selling model in the U.S. will hurt the company's brand image. China has expressed its will to conclude free trade talks with Korea on the sidelines of this year's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. This according to Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol, who was on a 2-day visit to Beijing this week for meetings with senior Chinese officials. Cho said the officials urged him to make sure the bilateral agreement was ready to be signed at the APEC summit this November in Beijing. In response, Cho said he asked the Chinese side to put more political will into meeting that schedule, but the Korean minister added the talks are proceeding at a snail's pace as both sides remain far apart on tariff removal for agricultural and industrial goods. During the latest round of negotiations, the two countries agreed in principle on market liberalization.
Now, if you're watching us in Korea or you've been here in recent years, you'll have an idea of how widespread smart devices are. Pretty much everyone has one. So you won't be that surprised to hear that Korea's mobile internet usage percentage is the highest in the Asia-Pacific region at more than 70%. Market research firm eMarketer also says Korea will lead the mobile internet usage among the Asia-Pacific countries until 2018. Behind Korea at the moment are Australia, Japan and China, respectively. India is the fastest growing mobile internet market in the region. The average percentage of mobile internet users in the entire Asia-Pacific region was lower than 30% this year, but it is expected to expand to more than 38% on average by 2018. eMarketer considered a person who accessed a mobile web browser or mobile application at least once a month as a mobile internet user. Now, Seoul really is a wonderful city full of modern architecture, bustling streets and vibrant nightlife. But there is one common criticism levelled at the capital: the lack of green space. Well, there's a push on now to make Seoul much more green. It's the Welfare Forest project, and it's the city government's plan to spruce up the yards of the more than 5,000 welfare centres and special education facilities around the capital. Connie Lee reports.
From the looks of it, it doesn't seem like you're in a busy metropolis. But in the yards of Seoul's various social welfare centers and education facilities, lush green scenery is what you can see. The Welfare Forest project is a campaign currently underway by the Seoul metropolitan government for more green spaces in the city, especially for those places that need it the most.
If you see a lot of these welfare centers or public interest facilities, their outdoor environment is very poor. But with this project, we want to make those environments more green with a park, garden, or forest.
For instance, at the so-called Dream Tree Village, which consists of an orphanage and a specialized school, some empty space was able to be transformed.
Now, this area was once just a field of dirt, creating a lot of dust. But now it has transformed into a very welcoming park.
The kids like to catch many insects here. Also, the teachers like to bring the children out here for a picnic.
Even residents nearby are able to enjoy the park.
There are so many trees here and the air is nice. I feel good and refreshed when I'm here.
It's a city initiative, along with the Korea Forest Service, that started back in 2008. encouraging different public interest facilities to apply for this funding and have their front yards or backyards transformed. So far, more than 26 facilities in the city have a new garden or park to boast about, with the government now accepting more applications for the year 2015. The deadline to apply for the program for next year is this Friday. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
It's going to be another sweltering day with highs hovering in the low to mid-30s across the nation with a chance of outbreaks of rain in many areas. But rain won't bring any relief to the steamy conditions. Heat wave advisory and warnings will continue in a number of regions. Also, we are expecting partly to mostly cloudy skies, but Typhoon Naguri is on its way. It's forecast to indirectly affect the southern parts of the Korean peninsula tomorrow and throughout the weekend. So if you're having a vacation in Jeju or the southern coast, please keep an eye on the future weather update. With that, here are the readings for today. The high in Seoul will rise to 33, while Daegu will climb to 34, and Gwangju and Busan will top out at 32 and 30 respectively. And for other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon will hit 32 and 33, and Mount Keungang should reach at 23. Well, that's all for me today, and back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Jim, for that forecast. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Yes, and Jinju and I will be back at the same time on Friday. Thank you ever so much for watching.